They judged me, mocked me, and even my family turned their backs when I revealed my pregnancy. But I gathered every proof of his lies. On graduation day, I exposed him in front of the whole school. The whispers finally changed direction, and I reclaimed my dignity. My life in the final year of school was supposed to be about dreams, laughter, and a future waiting just beyond graduation. Instead, it became the year everything shattered. I still remember the day I realized I was pregnant. It wasn't joy that washed over me, it was fear, a bone-deep fear that gripped me like cold steel. I was only 17, still a girl myself, and suddenly the weight of the world pressed against me. The first person I trusted with this truth was him, the boy who had promised me forever in late-night whispers and careless smiles. I thought he would hold me up when the ground began to crumble. I thought he would stay. But the day I told him, his expression changed. His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes widened, and for a moment, he was silent, staring at me as though I had become a stranger. Then he laughed. Not the kind of laugh that eases tension, but sharp, cruel, like I had said something ridiculous. He denied it instantly. He told me it wasn't his, that I was trying to trap him, that I was nothing more than a foolish girl looking for someone to blame. His words sliced through me, leaving wounds no one could see. I begged him not to abandon me, not to turn away, but his voice grew colder. Within days, the whispers started. He had spread the story before I even had time to gather my thoughts. Suddenly, I was painted as the reckless girl who had slept around, the one desperate for attention, the one who couldn't keep her dignity. Every rumor carried his fingerprints, and every lie spread faster than I could chase it. Walking through the school hallways became a torment. I felt eyes pierce into me, some filled with disgust, others with curiosity, none with kindness. People who once sat with me at lunch now shifted away. Friends who had shared secrets with me no longer answered my calls. Even teachers seemed to look at me differently, as though I had failed them, as though my worth had diminished overnight. I became the center of gossip, the subject of cruel laughter behind cupped hands. My belly wasn't even showing yet, but the shame felt larger than life. At home, it was worse. My parents found out not from me, but from the rumors that had spread like wildfire. My mother's face was etched with disappointment, my father's silence heavier than words. They asked me questions I couldn't answer, not because I didn't know the truth, but because the truth was too fragile, too easily dismissed against the lies he had built. I told them it was his child, that I wasn't lying, but they looked at me with doubt. It felt as though I had lost everything in a single breath, the boy I loved, the trust of my parents, the respect of my peers. Nights became unbearable. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had spiraled so quickly. The girl I once was, the hopeful student, the dreamer, the believer in love, felt like a ghost I could no longer reach. I felt trapped in a cage built by his betrayal and everyone else's judgment. I stopped raising my hand in class, stopped smiling at the small joys of the day. Each morning, I dragged myself out of bed, knowing I would face another day of ridicule, another day of whispers that made me feel like I didn't belong. But even in that darkness, a small flame refused to die. Maybe it was survival, maybe it was anger, maybe it was the stubborn belief that truth had to matter. I couldn't erase the lies with words alone, they were too loud, too many. But I could gather proof. Quietly, I began to collect the fragments of our story, the text messages he had sent me, the photos we had taken together, the promises he had written late at night when he thought love was forever. I held on to them, not yet knowing how or when I would use them, but believing one day they would matter. School became a battlefield where I fought in silence. Every cruel laugh, every mocking glance fueled the determination growing inside me. I learned to keep my head down, but my mind stayed sharp, recording every detail, every contradiction in his lies. When he bragged to his friends, I noticed. When he slipped up and changed parts of his story, I remembered. And while everyone else saw me as the fallen girl, I began to see myself as something else, a storm waiting for the right moment to break. Still, the pain didn't vanish. There were days when I broke down in the privacy of my room, when I wished I could disappear, when I felt too small to fight against the tide. The loneliness was unbearable, especially knowing the father of my child had become the loudest voice against me. I watched him laugh in the cafeteria, watched his friends slap him on the back as though he were a hero, while I sat alone, drowning in silence. He carried himself with arrogance, secure in the belief that no one would ever discover the truth. But I carried something stronger than his arrogance. I carried truth itself. And though truth moves slowly, though it often arrives too late, I believed it would one day shine brighter than his lies. I promised myself that I wouldn't let him win, that I wouldn't let his betrayal define the rest of my life. By the time graduation approached, the weight of the lies had nearly broken me, but the fire inside burned brighter. I had endured enough humiliation, enough shame, enough nights spent questioning my own worth. I was done being the victim in his story. If he wanted to turn the world against me, then I would turn the truth against him. My plan wasn't born of hatred but of necessity. I didn't want to destroy him, I wanted to reclaim myself. So I prepared. I organized every piece of evidence, every word, every memory. I played the scene over in my head countless times, imagining the silence that would follow, the shift in eyes that would no longer look at me with judgment but at him with disgust. The thought of it gave me strength. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. But hope wasn't enough. I needed courage. And courage, I learned, isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stand up when everything tells you to stay down. It's the whisper in your soul that refuses to be silenced, even when the world has turned against you. As I stood on the edge of graduation, I held on to that whisper. I wasn't the same girl who had cried in silence when he betrayed me. I was someone stronger, forged in fire, carrying truth like a weapon. My final year had been stolen from me, twisted into a nightmare I hadn't chosen. But I had survived it. And survival was only the beginning. The time was coming when I would no longer be the girl they whispered about. I would be the girl who exposed the truth. And when that day came, the shame would no longer belong to me. When I entered the second half of my final year, life no longer felt like mine. Each step I took down those crowded school hallways was heavy, dragging behind me the weight of shame others had tied around my neck. They didn't see me as the girl I had once been, honor student, quiet dreamer, friend who laughed too loudly at silly jokes. They only saw the rumors he had painted of me. To them, I was a warning, an example of what not to become, a disgrace walking with lowered eyes. But inside me, something was shifting. I was breaking apart, yes, but in those cracks, I was also building something stronger. I learned the skill of silence. When someone whispered as I walked by, I didn't respond. When classmates laughed behind me, I didn't turn my head. On the outside, I let them believe they had defeated me. Inside, I was gathering strength like storm clouds no one could see. Every insult became fuel. Every sideways glance carved my resolve deeper. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of hurting him, it was about survival. It was about not letting the lies choke me into silence forever. I began watching him closely. The boy who had denied me, who had spread those lies, walked the halls with his head high, his smile wide, his arrogance untouchable. He had convinced everyone that I was the reckless one, and he was the victim. I hated him for that, but I also studied him. I listened when he spoke too loudly in the cafeteria, bragging to his friends about conquests that didn't exist. I watched him slip when he contradicted himself, telling one version of the story to one group and another version to someone else. He was careless because he thought he was untouchable. At night, in the privacy of my room, I opened the drawer where I kept my collection of truths. Screenshots of messages he had sent me, his words filled with promises he now pretended had never existed. Photos of us together, moments he couldn't deny, evidence he had once cared, once claimed me proudly when no one else was watching. I replayed his voice messages, whispering about the future we'd have, about how we belonged to each other. He didn't know I had saved them all. He thought deleting his side of the story erased it from existence. But I had everything. There were days when doubt crept in, when I questioned whether anyone would even believe me once I showed them. Lies, after all, are easier to believe than the messy truth. And my truth wasn't clean, it was tangled, painful, hard to digest. I worried people would twist it again, turn me into the villain even when the proof was in my hands. But every time fear tried to silence me, I thought of my child. I thought of the life growing inside me, innocent, undeserving of the shame its father had built. If I couldn't fight for myself, then I would fight for that tiny heartbeat I carried. Still, the loneliness gnawed at me. Friends I had trusted disappeared. Even the ones who stayed didn't know how to look at me anymore. They offered pity, not loyalty. And pity was another form of judgment, softer but still sharp. So I stopped expecting anyone to stand by me. I learned to rely only on myself. I went to school, endured the stares, came home, worked on my classes, and planned quietly. My world shrank to a cycle of endurance and preparation. The pain of isolation pressed against me daily, but in its pressure, it hardened me. One afternoon, I overheard him laughing with his friends. They were talking about me, of course. I was the easiest subject, the one everyone felt free to mock. He called me desperate, said I would say anything to trap him, joked that he could pick any girl he wanted, and I was proof of what happened when a girl like me got greedy. Their laughter echoed, bouncing around the hall, digging into me like knives. But instead of breaking down, I pulled out my phone later that night and added his cruelty to my memory. Every word he spoke against me would only make his fall harder when the time came. The school wasn't kind, and neither was home. My parents, though not openly cruel, had grown distant. The dinners we once shared with laughter were now filled with silence. Their disappointment hung in the air heavier than any spoken words. I longed for comfort, for someone to tell me I wasn't ruined, but those words never came. So I built comfort for myself, whispering in the quiet hours that I was still worthy, still strong, still more than what they saw. As the months passed, my pregnancy began to show. The whispers grew louder, the stares bolder. Now there was physical proof of what they believed, but none of the truth I carried. I walked into classrooms and felt eyes trail down my body, some with disgust, some with curiosity. Teachers avoided calling on me, classmates avoided sitting near me. The isolation became complete, and yet, within that isolation, my resolve sharpened. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was planning. Graduation loomed on the horizon, the ceremony that was supposed to mark the end of my school years, the beginning of my future. For months, I had dreaded it, imagining walking across the stage under the weight of their judgment. But as the day drew closer, my vision shifted. I no longer feared graduation, it became the stage for my truth. It was the place where I would no longer whisper in the dark, but speak in a voice no one could ignore. I practiced what I would say. In the mirror, in the silence of my room, I spoke the words I had bottled up for so long. I rehearsed how I would look at him, how I would reveal the evidence, how I would stand tall when the truth left my lips. I wasn't preparing for applause or forgiveness. I was preparing to reclaim myself. I wanted their eyes to shift, for once, from me to him. I wanted the shame to finally rest on the shoulders it belonged to. The thought terrified me. Public speaking had never been my strength, and now I was planning to bare my soul in front of the entire school. My hands shook at the thought of it, my heart raced so hard I thought it might break through my chest. But every fear was answered by anger, by the memory of his laugh, by the sting of their judgment. Fear built walls, anger gave me hammers to break them. I didn't know exactly how the moment would unfold, but I knew one thing, I wouldn't stay silent. Silence had almost destroyed me, and I was done giving it power. So I waited. I endured each day as though it were nothing more than a step toward the inevitable. I endured the stares, the whispers, the cruel jokes. I endured the distance from my family, the loneliness of empty lunch tables. I endured everything because I knew it was temporary. Soon, the lies would unravel. Soon, the truth would echo louder than any rumor. By the time graduation week arrived, I wasn't the same broken girl who had once cried into her pillow, begging the world to see her. I was someone different now, someone forged in betrayal and silence. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was ready. Graduation day felt like the final battlefield of my high school years. From the moment I opened my eyes, I could feel my pulse racing, not just with nerves but with a strange kind of calm. I had been waiting for this moment. I had endured the whispers, the stares, the cruel rumors, and the broken trust. Today, I wasn't here just to graduate. I was here to set the truth free. I got dressed slowly, as though preparing myself for war. My graduation gown covered me like a shield, hiding the body everyone had judged so harshly. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the same girl who had once started this final year with big dreams. I saw someone who had been hardened by betrayal. My eyes didn't look afraid anymore. They looked determined. When I arrived at the auditorium, the atmosphere was buzzing. Parents filled the seats, classmates clustered together, laughing and taking pictures. To them, this was a day of celebration, but to me, it was the day everything would finally change. I took my seat among the other graduates, ignoring the glances I could still feel on me. Let them look. They had stared for months. Today, their eyes would finally see something different. And then I spotted him. He was standing in a group, laughing as though he had never done a single thing wrong. His confidence made my stomach twist, but when his eyes briefly met mine, I didn't look away. I stared back, long enough to make him uncomfortable, long enough to remind him that I wasn't broken. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease on his face. The ceremony went on. Names were called, speeches were made, applause filled the air. My hands shook in my lap, but it wasn't nerves about walking across the stage, it was about what I had planned. I had carried the truth like a secret weapon, and today I was finally going to use it. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, took my diploma, but instead of sitting back down, I stepped toward the microphone. For a moment, the entire room hesitated, unsure of what I was doing. The silence was heavy, but I welcomed it. I know this isn't part of the ceremony, I began, my voice trembling slightly, but I have something I need to say. For months, I've carried shame that never belonged to me. I've been judged, ridiculed, and abandoned because of lies. The auditorium went still. My voice grew stronger. You all know the rumors. You've seen the whispers follow me. But what you don't know is the truth. I trusted someone. I believed his promises. And when I needed him most, he abandoned me. He lied to all of you and let me carry this burden alone. My eyes locked on him in the crowd. His smile was gone. He shifted in his seat, his face pale. But I didn't just come here to speak, I continued. Because words can be twisted. Lies can sound like truth. He thought he could erase what he did. He thought he could walk away. But I kept everything. I pulled out my phone, my hands no longer shaking. The messages, the promises, the confessions, they're all here. And I think everyone deserves to see them. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the screen behind me lit up. Message after message appeared. His words, his voice notes, his promises. The evidence filled the room like thunder. The silence broke into waves of shock. Parents leaned forward, classmates turned to one another, teachers whispered in disbelief. He sat frozen, his head lowered, his confidence gone. For the first time, the weight of judgment wasn't on me, it was on him. This is the truth, I said firmly. This is who he really is. And I won't carry his lies anymore. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't wait for anyone's approval. I walked off the stage, my chest heaving, my heart pounding, but for the first time, I felt light. Behind me, the whispers rose, but they weren't about me anymore. They were about him. Stepping outside into the sunlight, I felt the warmth on my skin like a promise. I wasn't free from pain, and my journey wasn't over, but I had taken back my voice. I had shown everyone the truth. And the shame he tried to bury me under was finally his to carry. When I walked out of the auditorium that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight I had carried, the shame that was never mine, finally slid off my shoulders. Inside, the ceremony carried on, but I no longer cared. I had spoken my truth, and the silence afterward told me everything I needed to know. The crowd finally saw who he really was. As people poured out of the hall, I noticed the change in their eyes. The same classmates who once whispered behind my back now avoided meeting my gaze. Some looked at me with guilt, others with something close to respect. But all of them knew now. The truth had stripped away their lies. He walked out moments later, pale and defeated, the boy who once mocked me now shrinking under the weight of whispers that clung to him. He avoided everyone's eyes, especially mine. For months, he had carried himself with arrogance, laughing at my pain. Now he could not even lift his head. That sight alone was enough. I didn't approach him, I didn't need to. My revenge was already complete. The proof I had gathered, the truth I had laid bare, had destroyed the mask he wore. His reputation crumbled in a single afternoon, the same way he tried to shatter mine. Some of my classmates tried to speak to me, offering half-hearted apologies. "We didn't know," one girl whispered. I looked at her calmly and said, "You didn't care to know." I walked away, leaving her in silence. At home, the silence was heavier. My family had seen everything. They had believed him once, doubted me when I needed them most, and now they knew the truth. My mother's voice trembled when she said, "We should have trusted you." I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I only said, "Now you know." The hurt in my chest was still there, but I didn't let it show. Trust, once broken, is not so easily repaired. In the weeks that followed, his life fell apart piece by piece. His friends drifted away, teachers looked at him with disappointment, and the respect he once demanded was gone. He had no lies left to hide behind. I didn't gloat, I didn't chase him down, because the whispers followed him everywhere now. He was living in the same prison of judgment he had built for me. And me? I felt free. For the first time in months, I could walk through the halls without lowering my head. People still whispered, but this time it wasn't mockery, it was shock, guilt, and quiet acknowledgement. Their opinions no longer mattered, because I had taken back the one thing he tried to steal, my dignity. At night, I often thought about the girl I had been when the year began, hopeful, naive, and far too trusting. That girl was gone. What remained was someone stronger, sharper, someone who had survived betrayal and come out standing taller. Revenge hadn't made me cruel. It had set me free. He was left with shame, and I was left with strength. And as I looked forward, I realized something. I wasn't ending my story that day, I was only beginning it. He had tried to ruin me, but in the end, his betrayal became my weapon. That was my justice. That was my victory. If this story kept you watching, make sure to subscribe this channel Payback Hour for more powerful tales of betrayal and justice. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to like the video, it helps us bring you even more gripping stories you won't want to miss.